Welcome back, and thank you for tuning into Midnight Affairs Tales. We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know what part of the world you are watching from right now. Let us know in the comments. Now let's dive into today's story, Chapter 1. The Last Shift. Reed Mallory stepped out of St. Augustine Medical, his blue scrubs clinging to him from 16 hours of blood, sweat, and trauma. The Florida sun hit hard, even at 7 p.m., bouncing off the concrete like a slow burn. He wiped his face, checked his phone. No texts. Not from Kira. Not in 5 days. He exhaled slow. Marriage wasn't supposed to go silent. But lately, hers did. New job. Long nights. Locked screen. It's just work, she'd say, voice clipped, eyes already back on her phone. He tossed his gym bag into the back of his truck and started the engine. The tires crunched on old gravel as he passed their usual takeout spot, Thai Express. First date memories tried creeping in. He shut them out. The drive home was short, too short tonight. Then he saw it. His clothes, not in a suitcase, not in boxes, but stuffed into black garbage bags, dumped across the front lawn like trash. A tall, tan guy with thick arms and a smug grin tossed another bag down. Kira stood beside him, laughing, until she saw Reed. Her smile faltered. "You're home early," she said, stepping forward, arms crossing her chest like armor. 16 hours is early? Reed asked, his voice calm, but his jaw tight. The man turned, smirked. Something familiar in the way he stood. "Reed, you remember Dane Holloway, right? From college." Reed's stomach dropped. Kira's ex. The one she said was a mistake she barely survived. "What's in the bags?" Reed asked, though he already knew. Kira's voice turned brittle. "We needed closet space. For his things." His world cracked, but his face didn't. "Is he staying long?" Reed asked. They both laughed. "Permanently," Dane said. "So what do you do when your whole life's tossed out in black plastic bags?" Reed didn't yell. He didn't even blink. He just stared at the pile. Shirts crumpled. His old army duffel bag ripped open. A photo album poking out the side like an unwanted memory. Kira watched him with a strange mix of discomfort and curiosity, as if waiting for the explosion that never came. "You're being dramatic," she snapped. "It's just stuff." Reed crouched, gently picking up the album. Pages bent, some torn. Dane pulled Kira close. "Want me to toss the rest?" "No," Reed said quietly. "I've got it." He walked to his truck, opened the tailgate, and began loading each bag without a word. His hands moved with practiced calm, the kind he used in combat zones and ER trauma units. Kira fidgeted. "You're really just leaving?" Reed didn't answer. Dane leaned on the porch railing, smirking. "You want a beer for the road, soldier?" Reed met his eyes. Calm. Steady. "I hope you know what you're stepping into," he said flatly. Dane's smirk twitched. "Oh, I do." Reed shut the tailgate. "No, you really don't." Then he got in his truck, engine rumbling to life. As he pulled away, he saw Kira laughing again in the mirror, this time more forced, more defensive. 10 minutes later, Reed parked at the old Harlan Motel. Room 6. Same one he stayed in during the renovations. Same key under the mat. He sat on the bed, still in scrubs. Reached under his coat pocket. The phone he hadn't used in 3 years. He dialed. "Yeah," a gravel voice answered. "It's me," Reed said. Pause. "Holy sh*T. You alive?" "I need a favor," Reed said. "It's time." The room smelled like mildew and stale cigarettes. Reed didn't care. He sat still, hands resting on his knees, letting the silence settle. The man who arrived 20 minutes later hadn't changed. Shaved head. Combat boots. Scar across his neck like a warning label. Brody Calhoun stepped inside and locked the door behind him. "No hellos," he said, tossing a duffel on the bed. Reed stood. "Didn't think I'd need one." "You said it was time." Brody looked him over. "You look like death." Reed smirked. "Close enough." Brody pulled out a burner laptop, a handgun, and a thin envelope. "I kept everything ready. You were the one playing house." Reed took the envelope. Inside were photos, statements, timelines. His files. His war chest. "They sold me out," he said finally. "Your wife." Brody asked. Reed nodded once. Her. And him. Brody leaned back in the chair. The ex. Reed's eyes darkened. The same one she told me nearly broke her. She let him move in while I was on shift. Tossed my life on the lawn. Brody whistled low. She doesn't know you're alive? No one does, Reed said. Let's keep it that way. Brody cracked his neck. So what now? Reed looked at the wall, cheap wallpaper peeling in the corner, and smiled. We rebuild. And them? Reed's voice was quiet. Sharp. They'll never see me coming. The obituary was brief. Reed Mallory, 38, former Army combat medic and trauma nurse, presumed dead after a private overseas mission. No known survivors. No remains recovered. Kira had written it herself. Reed recognized her phrasing, clipped, emotionless, practical. No memorial was held. No folded flag. Just paperwork. Insurance claims. And silence. He stood outside Oakwell Cemetery, cap low, hoodie up. His own name was etched into a smooth black stone. A quote beneath it read, "Gone to save others." Reed scoffed. "Gone to fund your new kitchen, more like." A few rows away, a small boy knelt beside another grave. Same age Reed was when his dad disappeared. The boy wiped dirt off the stone with a tissue, placed a toy soldier down, then just sat there. Quiet. Still. Reed's eyes narrowed. The name on the grave beside his? Colton Braddock. Former Cerberus contractor. Mia. Declared dead, same day as Reed. His pulse kicked up. The boy left. Reed waited a beat, then stepped closer. A thin manila envelope sat behind the headstone, sealed in plastic. To someone still watching. Inside was a photo. 2 men in uniform. One was Reed. The other was Colton. The back read, "If you're alive, you're next." Reed's throat tightened. This wasn't just betrayal. This was planned. The old neighborhood hadn't changed much. Same cracked sidewalks. Same porch lights on timers. But Reed felt like a ghost drifting through it. He parked 2 blocks away. Walked in the dark, hoodie up, gloves on. Kira's house, his house, was lit up like Christmas. Wine glasses clinked inside. Laughter. Dane's laugh. Deep. Mocking. Reed moved to the side fence. The gate creaked softly as he slipped in. The garage keypad was the same, her birthday. Still arrogant. He moved fast. Inside. Upstairs. Quiet. Their old bedroom had been rearranged. Dane's weights in the corner. A giant TV mounted. His books gone. His medals dumped in a plastic tote labeled garage. Reed opened her laptop. Password, Blue Ridge 17, the place they honeymooned. Another piece of her pretending to remember love. He dug. Found emails. Financials. Cerberus Foundation. Dane's name attached. But deeper than that, charity funds funneled through offshore accounts. Shell companies. Fake rehabilitation projects. Ghost employees. All tied to Cerberus Risk Group. Kira had power of attorney over one account. She hadn't just betrayed Reed. She'd cashed in on his death to help launder millions. Reed's hands tightened into fists. But he didn't flip the desk. He didn't scream. He just copied the hard drive. Took screenshots. Took proof. Before leaving, he opened the closet. Inside, pushed to the corner, was his old uniform. Still clean. Untouched. He ran a hand over the patch. His name, Mallory. This time, he whispered, "You die first." He returned to the motel before sunrise. Brody was asleep in the chair, boots propped on the desk. A gun rested on the nightstand like a coiled snake. Reed threw the drive on the bed. Brody stirred. "What did you find?" "Everything," Reed said. "Cerberus wasn't just using my name. They're washing money through nonprofits. She's signing off on it." Brody sat up. "Kira, she sold me out. Legally. Financially. Maybe even operationally." Reed clicked the laptop open. The stolen files flickered on screen. Account transfers. Fake service records. Just a spreadsheet and 2 words in the subject line. "Follow this." He didn't wait for a reply. Kira was already walking across a minefield. She just didn't know it yet. Brody leaned back. "What's the next move?" Reed's eyes didn't leave the screen. "We make her the face of the fall. I want her smiling on stage, while the world burns around her. The ballroom shimmered with rented glamour, chandeliers glinting off sequin dresses, champagne flowing like water. The Harlow Foundation's annual Widows' Gala was in full swing, and Kira Mallory, smiling in a red silk gown, was its star. "Let's welcome the woman who's turned grief into power," the MC announced. "Mrs. Kira Mallory." Applause thundered. Cameras flashed. Kira stepped onto the stage, her smile practiced to perfection. But behind the curtain, in a black cap and tuxwader uniform, Reed watched. From 10 feet away, not one twitch of recognition. She talked about healing, about losing her husband, a true hero, how the Harlow Foundation was helping rebuild lives left behind by fallen soldiers. Reed scanned the room. Senator Ulrich at table 3, Marcus Devlin, arms contractor, major donor, and Dane, front row, wearing his cufflinks. Reed's jaw tightened. Then came the moment. As Kira spoke about transparency, Reed reached into his pocket and triggered the device. A USB wired into the ballroom slideshow feed. The screen behind Kira flickered, then changed. A spreadsheet of names, transfers, hidden accounts. Cerberus LLC. Kira's name. Dane's name. The crowd murmured. Kira turned, confused. The microphone caught her gasp. The MC rushed the stage. "Sorry, folks. Technical issue, but the seed was planted." Reed walked away unnoticed, the USB gone, the damage done. Outside, Brody waited in a blacked-out SUV. "You're smiling," he said as Reed got in. "She wanted a stage," Reed said, watching her face shrink in the rearview mirror. "I gave her one." 2 days later, Reed sat in a greasy diner, baseball cap pulled low. A newspaper lay open on the table. Local nonprofit under scrutiny after gala, glitch. The article didn't name names yet, but it had already triggered a chain reaction. Kira's name was being whispered. Dane's company was being searched on watchdog forums. And the screenshots? They'd gone viral. He stirred his coffee slowly, listening to 2 men in suits at the next table. "She's cooked," one muttered. "You see those bank transfers? And her being executor of his will? Come on. You think he's really dead?" the other said. Reed's lips curled at the edges. The waitress came by. "Warm up, please," Reed said, sliding his cup forward. She leaned in. "That woman on the news, she's your wife, ain't she?" Reed didn't answer. "She looked real sorry," the waitress added. "Not sorry enough," Reed murmured. His phone buzzed once. A message from Brody. "Dane's digging. Heard you might be alive." Reed stood, dropped cash on the table, and walked out. By the time he reached the SUV, Brody had the laptop open, showing footage from a private poker game. Dane was drinking. Loud. "He's getting reckless," Brody said. "Mentioned you by name." "He doesn't believe I'm dead anymore," Reed said. "He's gonna come looking." Reed looked out the windshield. Let him. He wasn't hiding. Not anymore. The hotel bar was dim, filled with the soft hum of business types unwinding. Reed sat in the far booth, dressed clean, beard trimmed. He looked like any other man on his way to somewhere else. Across from him sat Tessayun, sharp, cold-eyed, and built like someone who never forgot a single debt. "You want me to burn my credentials for this," she said, sipping neat whiskey. "You owe me," Reed replied. She scoffed. "That was Afghanistan. We're both different people now." "No," Reed said. "You just got more expensive." He slid a USB across the table. "Everything you need to trace the shell companies. I don't want headlines. I want pressure. IRS audits. Freezes. Quiet hell." Tessa turned the drive in her hand. "Cerberus is dangerous. I'm counting on it." Her eyes softened just enough. "You really loved her, didn't you?" He didn't answer. "Instead," he said, "if I disappear again, make sure someone finishes what I started." She pocketed the USB. "You disappear, and I'm taking all the credit." Reed cracked a rare smile. "Deal." As she left, Brody appeared near the booth. "She's in." Reed nodded. "We're not going to kill them, are we?" Brody asked. "No," Reed said, standing. "We're going to ruin them." He paused at the bar mirror, looked himself in the eyes for the first time in weeks. "Quiet doesn't mean weak," he whispered. "Not anymore." Tessa moved fast. By sunrise, a Cerberus-linked holding company called Brinex Group had its accounts flagged for audit. 36 hours later, the IRS issued a freeze on assets worth over $8.4 million. Reed watched it unfold from a small co-working space downtown, screens lighting up in real time. One window showed Brinex executives scrambling in a video call. Another tracked internal chatter. Panic was spreading. He didn't smile. Not yet. Brody slid into the chair beside him. They're spiraling. They'll cut off the bottom layers first, Reed said. Sacrifice pawns to protect the king. Kira, she's not the king. She's the mask. Brody leaned back. And Dane. Reed clicked into a security file. Surveillance footage. Dane pacing in a luxury condo, shouting into a burner phone. Pacing. Drinking. Ripping papers. Dane's a weapon, Reed said coldly. Someone's been aiming him. Brody raised a brow. So who's behind the trigger? Reed clicked to an encrypted folder Tessa had cracked. A name flashed across the screen. Marcus Devlin. Defense contractor. Political donor. And Harlow's silent backer. Reed stared at the photo. Gray suit. Empty eyes. Fake smile. He's not Cerberus, Reed said. He built it. The room went quiet. Brody finally said, You're not just going after Kira anymore, are you? No, Reed said. She betrayed me. But they used me. He leaned closer to the screen. And I'm done being used. Reed rented it under a fake name. 2-bedroom unit, directly facing Kira's new condo. A sniper's view, if he'd wanted one. But he wasn't pulling triggers. He was collecting proof. He sat behind a mounted camera, lens aimed at the balcony. Every night, Kira stepped outside with a glass of red wine. Sometimes alone, sometimes with Dane. Sometimes crying. Sometimes laughing. She never looked up. On the 4th night, a package arrived for her. Dane opened it. Inside, a manila envelope. Kira froze as she saw what was inside. Photos. Screenshots. The charity accounts. The gala slideshow. Red marker slashing across the page. You don't know who's watching. Dane slammed the balcony door and made calls. 5, 6, 7 in a row. Reed watched his pacing turn into yelling. The wall of confidence began to crack. Kira sat alone on the couch for hours after. Her wine untouched. Hands shaking. Reed's phone buzzed. Tessa, it worked. They think it came from inside. He replied, Let them burn their own house. Then he pulled out the second camera. This one aimed at Devlin's penthouse across the skyline. He watched them all, rats on a sinking ship. And in that quiet, high above darkness, Reed whispered, Let them fear shadows. Kira found them on her doorstep. No lawyer. No courtesy call. Just a manila folder marked Mallory versus Mallory inside. Papers already signed, notarized, stamped with an effective date. Alongside it, a single note in Reed's handwriting. I want nothing but your silence. Break it, and I'll take everything. She stared at it for a long time. Dane picked up the folder, scoffing. This is what he's doing? Legal threats. Kira didn't respond. You're not scared of this, are you? He asked, voice tight. She took the note and folded it into her purse. We need to talk to Devlin. Dane stepped back. He told us this wouldn't get messy. Kira's hands trembled. He lied. Across the street, Reed filmed the entire exchange. Audio was scratchy, but clear enough. Brody watched over his shoulder. She's cracking. She's running out of air, Reed said. But she won't go down alone. Is that what worries you? No, Reed said. What worries me is what she'll do before she falls. He saved the footage, labeled it Leverage 1. Then he stood up. Time to pay Devlin a visit. Marcus Devlin's office sat high above the city in a tower of steel and glass. It was the kind of place built to intimidate. Everything inside gleamed. Imported wood, soundless elevators, a panoramic view of a world Devlin thought he owned. Reed entered under the name Daniel Rhodes, a fake identity backed by a hacked Department of Defense clearance badge. Security waved him through without blinking. Inside the executive suite, Devlin was mid-call. He didn't look up. You're early. I'm thorough, Reed replied, taking a seat like you belong there. Devlin finally looked over sharp suit, icy eyes. The kind of man who shook hands while ordering deaths through intermediaries. "You're with Vector?" Devlin asked, referring to a fictional overseas PMC Reed invented for the meeting. "We've done work for Cerberus," Reed said. "Picked up some debris in the process." He slid a file across the desk. Devlin opened it. His brow twitched. Just slightly. Inside were redacted mission logs, shipping routes, and invoices Cerberus tried to scrub. A photograph, Dane and Kira, sitting with one of Devlin's European contractors. "Interesting collection," Devlin said coolly. "There's more," Reed said. "But I like to know who I'm working with." Devlin leaned back. "And what do you want, Mr. Rhodes?" "Same thing you do," Reed said. "To know when the game changes." They locked eyes. Reed's heart thundered, but his face stayed still. Devlin nodded once. "I'll be in touch." As Reed walked out, he slid a flash drive into the back of Devlin's office server. Quiet. Quick. Back in the elevator, he exhaled for the first time in 10 minutes. Brody's voice came through the comm. "Tell me you got it." "All of it," Reed said. "Every lie, straight from the source." Kira sat in her car outside a pharmacy parking lot, hands trembling around the steering wheel. Her phone lit up again. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. No voice. Just a recording. Her voice. From a year ago. "I know what we're doing is wrong. But Reed's gone. He's not coming back. We deserve a life." Static. Then a man's voice. Deep. Unfamiliar. "He's not gone. And you'll answer for it." Click. Kira threw the phone across the passenger seat, gasping. Inside the SUV, Dane climbed in, saw her face. "Another one?" She nodded. He grabbed the phone, scrolled through the missed calls. "How the hell is he doing this?" "He's dead," she snapped. "We buried him." "No," Dane said coldly. "We filed paperwork." "That's not the same." She looked at him, her mask slipping. "You said he wouldn't come back." "He won't," Dane said. "Because if he does, we end him for real." Across town, Reed rewound the call log, listened again to her voice admitting everything. "Still think she'll confess?" Brody asked. "No," Reed replied, "but she'll run scared." He paused the audio, isolating the timestamp and clipping it. "This is just the start. I want them hearing ghosts." Outside, thunder rumbled. The city was sliding into storm weather. Reed watched the dark clouds roll across the skyline. He'd always known war wasn't loud. Sometimes it crept in with whispers. Tessa sat in a rented workspace lit by a single flickering lamp. She didn't flinch as she typed, fingers moving fast across the keyboard. 3 monitors lit up with bank logs, shadow transfers, and dummy corporations. Reed stood behind her, arms crossed, watching as she broke down Cerberus's offshore holdings. "These aren't just shell accounts," Tessa said. "They're rotating through nonprofit fronts. Most of them supposedly benefit wounded veterans." Reed's stomach turned. "They're using names of the dead," he said. "Not just names," she added, clicking into a form. "Photos. Medals. Backgrounds. You were their prototype." He leaned in. The screen showed a profile, Captain Elias Rand, listed MIA, buried in a fake grave in North Carolina. Reed had served with him. He was never recovered after a failed extraction. "They're building ghosts," Reed muttered. "And profiting off them," Tessa said. "We shut these down, it'll take their whole foundation with it." Reed nodded. "Start with the one tied to Ulrich." Tessa blinked. "The senator? He's been protecting Cerberus for years. Time to cut his legs." Outside, Brody knocked once and entered. "Dane's booked a flight," he said. "Private jet. Leaving tomorrow." "Where to?" Reed asked. "Zurich." Reed smirked. "Running to his money." He looked at Tessa. "Can you make sure it's not there when he lands?" Tessa cracked her knuckles. "I already started." The house sat at the end of a dead-end street, wrapped in ivy and memory. Reed hadn't been here in over 6 years. Kira's mother, Nora Whitaker, opened the door without surprise. Age hadn't dulled her sharpness. She scanned Reed like he was a secret she'd expected to return. "Well, look who death forgot." Reed offered a faint smile. "You always were direct." Nora stepped aside. "I don't keep ghosts on the porch." "Come in." Inside, the house smelled of old furniture, lavender, and peppermint tea. Nothing had changed. Same photos, same dusty lamp. But Reed's eyes went to the framed photo on the mantel. Kira, graduation cap crooked, arm around Nora, smiling like she believed in the future. "She tell you I was dead?" Reed asked. Nora poured tea. "She said you died a hero." I didn't believe her. "Why not?" "Because she only cries when she's caught, not when she's grieving." "Read Saturday, you know what she's involved in." Nora nodded slowly. "Not the details, just the stench. And it started long before you. She was helping launder money. Through charities. Dane's firm. It's all connected. She always wanted power more than peace." Nora said, eyes distant. "You were her shield. Now you're her proof." Reed stood to leave. "You think exposing her will fix it?" she asked. "No," Reed said. "But watching her fall, that's a start." Nora didn't stop him. She just whispered, "Good. She's needed it for a long time." The underground poker club was buried beneath a shuttered bookstore in downtown Jacksonville. No signage. No security cameras. Just a code and a silent nod from a man with no name. Reed slipped in through the side, blending into the tailored suits and cigar smoke. Dane Holloway sat at the center table, whiskey in one hand, stack of chips in the other. He laughed too loud, his confidence brittle under the surface. A man who had no idea his world was collapsing. Reed moved to the bar, close enough to hear without being seen. "You all in, Holloway?" the dealer asked. Dane grinned. "Always." The cards flipped. He lost. Again. He slammed the table. "This deck's rigged." "No," the dealer replied calmly. "You're just sloppy tonight." Reed slid a flash drive across the bar to the bartender. "Play this. Loud. Now." The bartender gave him a look. Reed peeled 100 from his pocket. That sealed it. Seconds later, the club speakers kicked on not music, but a voice. Kira's voice. From the intercepted phone call, "I know what we're doing is wrong. But Reed's gone. He's not coming back." Heads turned. Dane froze. "What the F?" he muttered, rising. Reed was already gone. Outside, Brody waited with the engine running. "Done?" he asked. Reed nodded. "The sharks smell blood now. Let them eat him?" Reed didn't look back. Let him drown first. Back at the condo, Kira stood frozen, phone to her ear, eyes locked on the television. The poker club footage had gone viral. Someone had filmed the moment. The voice. The panic. Dane storming out. She couldn't breathe. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown caller. This time, she didn't answer. A voicemail dropped. She played it. It was Reed's voice, clear, cold. "You thought the world forgot me. But I've been watching. Counting. Waiting. This isn't a warning, Kira. It's a mirror." She dropped the phone. Dane stormed in seconds later, face pale with rage. "You set me up?" "What?" "No, your voice. That was our call. The one you said you deleted." "I didn't." Kira backed up. "I didn't send it." Dane grabbed her arm. "Then who the hell has it?" Silence. Heavy. Crushing. She knew. And it terrified her. Across town, Reed watched the footage again. Frame by frame. He could see it in her eyes now, not guilt. Fear. Brody stepped beside him. They're cornered. Reed's jaw clenched. "Good. Now we take everything they have left." Rain hammered the windshield as Reed pulled the SUV into the alley behind the Florida Ledger. He killed the engine, kept his eyes on the side door. Tessa sat in the passenger seat, reading the latest blog post from Miles Kerner, the independent journalist who leaked Reed's Cerberus documents under a pseudonym. He posted it, she confirmed. Everything. The shell companies. The false death reports. Cerberus links to political campaigns. It's out there. Reed nodded once. He knows the risk. Do you? Before he could answer, a black sedan tore into the alley and screeched to a halt at the curb. Two men jumped out, dark suits, too clean for contractors. One headed for the building's back entrance. Reed's gut clenched. Inside, a flash of movement. A single gunshot cracked. Then silence. The suited men ran back, jumped into the car, and peeled off into the storm. Reed was already out of the SUV, sprinting. He found Miles collapsed in the hallway, blood pooling beneath him, his laptop beside him. "Reed," he gasped. "They know." "Stay with me," Reed said, kneeling, pressing hard on the wound. But it was already over. Miles blinked once more, then stilled. Behind him, Tessa stepped in, white with shock. "They made it look like a robbery," she whispered. Reed picked up the laptop. "Still warm. Still open." He handed it to her. "Secure it. Back everything up." "Reed," he stood, soaked in blood and rain. "No more warnings," he said. "They kill now." Reed paced the length of the safe house, jaw clenched, fingers twitching. Brody secured the windows while Tessa copied the journalist's files onto an encrypted drive. Her hands were steady, but her silence spoke volumes. "They killed a reporter on U.S. soil," she finally said. "That's not just cleanup. That's control." Reed stopped pacing. "They're slipping. Desperate men get loud." He sat beside her, scanning through what Miles had managed to recover before his death. Logs of encrypted Cerberus correspondence, internal memos, off-the-book weapons shipments tied to Devlin's firm. One file stood out, Operation Wraith. He clicked it open. Photos, dossiers, names. Soldiers declared MIA just like him. Each one had been lost during Black Ops missions, then used as ghost identities to build fake nonprofits, siphon millions, and disappear into classified shadows. He scrolled until his own name appeared. Reed Mallory status, deceased asset value, cleared utilized, Cerberus Vet Trust Initiative, $3.4 million funneled since death. He leaned back slowly, breath shallow. "They cashed me in," he muttered. "Turned my death into a brand." Tessa looked over. "You're not the only one. This file's huge." Brody dropped into the chair beside them. "So we drop it all at once?" "No," Reed said. "We wait. Let Devlin think we're out of moves. Then we take him down where it hurts." Tessa tilted her head. "Where's that?" Reed's voice dropped low. "Public." He pointed to the calendar marked on the whiteboard. Harlow Foundation black tie auction, 12 days out. "They're going to parade themselves again. This time, we'll burn the whole room with them in it." Night had fallen like a curtain when Reed stepped onto the rooftop of a madrisse across from the Harlow Foundation's headquarters. He knelt near the ledge, binoculars raised, scanning the penthouse floor. Inside, Devlin, Kira, and Dan were locked in heated conversation. Tessa's voice came through the earpiece. "You're sure about tonight?" "They'll never expect it this early," Reed said. "You're about to make noise. That's the point." From his backpack, Reed pulled the compact drone. Not weaponized. This was a messenger. He activated it, guiding it across the open air, low and silent. It hovered outside the glass wall of Devlin's office. Inside, Devlin turned as a sharp ping echoed through the space. A flash drive dangled from the drone, blinking red. Reed pressed a key on his phone. The drone dropped the drive and zipped away before Devlin's security could react. 30 seconds later, Devlin loaded it into his laptop. Video began playing. A recording from Cerberus HQ, Devlin ordering the cover-up of Operation Wraith, calling veterans cost-effective PR assets. Dane in the background, laughing. Kira froze. Reed watched her step away from them. Her face changed. Devlin slammed the laptop shut. Reed smiled from the rooftop. "Tessa, think she's breaking?" "She's cornered. And she knows it. Won't she tell them it's you?" "Too risky. She won't even know how I got it." Brody's voice jumped in. "You just sent fire into their boardroom." "Good," Reed said. "I still locked on Devlin. I want them sweating when they walk into that auction." He stood, packed up, and vanished into the night. This was no longer about revenge. It was a reckoning. Wait. Before we go any further, we just hit 3,500 subscribers, and it's all thanks to you. If you love these stories, don't just watch. Subscribe and be part of the fam. Plus, because of your amazing support, I've launched a second channel full of intense revenge, cheating wife, and betrayal stories you'll love. Links in the description and pinned comment. Go check it out and subscribe now. Now tell me, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments below. All right, let's continue the story. Kira stood barefoot in her condo, staring at the paused frame on her laptop. Devlin laughing on camera, calling Reed's death cost-effective PR. Her chest rose and fell with short, sharp breaths. She played it again. This time, her eyes didn't leave Dane. "You knew," she whispered. He walked in behind her, drying his hands with a kitchen towel. "You've been quiet." She turned the laptop toward him. "So talk." Dane's face tightened. "It's edited." "Don't lie." He tossed the towel. "What do you want me to say, Kira? That the game changed? That we profited off someone who was already gone? Someone who was my husband?" she snapped. Dane moved closer. He wasn't coming back. "We were building something real." "No," she said, stepping back. "You were building it. I was just the brand." Dane's jaw clenched. "You think this doesn't burn me too? We're in this together." Kira stared at him, something collapsing inside her. "No," she said quietly. "We're not." She picked up her phone, scrolled to her call history. A burner number. The one that had been calling her. She tapped it. It rang. Across the city, Reed saw the number flash across his burner. He answered. Silence on the line. Then, "I need to know if you're alive." His voice was steady. "You just did." She gasped, and the line went dead. Tessa sat cross-legged in the safe house, laptop balanced on her knees, eyes locked on a hidden folder she'd finally decrypted. The screen glowed in the dim room, casting a bluish tint over her features. Reed leaned over her shoulder. "What is it?" She clicked the file. Braddock, Colton, MIA photos appeared. Reports. Then, a video file. Tessa hit play. The screen showed Colton Braddock, tied to a chair. Bruised. Bleeding. A Cerberus operative asked questions. Colton refused to answer. Devlin entered the frame. "I want the names. Or your wife and son disappear with you." Colton spat blood. "You'll have to kill me first." Devlin smiled. "That's the plan." The feed cut off. Reed exhaled hard. "Jesus. That was 2 days before your mission," Tessa said. Devlin didn't just bury him. He used him as leverage. Reed's jaw locked. "Where's the kid now?" "Still at his aunt's." "Name's Ty Braddock. Same one who left the envelope at your grave." Reed stood. "I want him protected. Around the clock." Tessa raised a brow. "You going soft?" "I'm not losing another one," he said. "Cerberus kills threats. I just made him a target." Across town, Ty Braddock played on the sidewalk, basketball bouncing in rhythm. He never saw the black SUV parked across the street. Inside, a camera clicked. A man dialed a number. "He's in place." Tessa stood in front of the corkboard now covered in pinned photos, bank logs, and red threads stretching across faces and titles: judges, donors, private investors, and operatives. She'd spent days tracking every Cerberus financial trail. Reed scanned the board. "This is their lifeline. They've spread their money into everything," she said. "Real estate, political donations, veteran outreach, even school funding, all under false names." Brody stepped in, tossing a USB on the table. I pulled the surveillance feeds. Devlin's people were watching Ty Braddock. Reed's spine straightened. "Then they're getting ready to use him." "We pull the kid now?" Brody asked. "No," Reed said. "We let them think he's bait." Tessa looked at him. "That's a gamble." "It's a message," Reed said. "If they touch him, we go nuclear. Every name on this board goes public." He grabbed a red marker and circled a name near the top: Senator Ulrich. "He's the keystone," Reed said. "Pull him out, and the rest collapses." Tessa nodded. "He's speaking at the auction next week. Press coverage, live cameras." Reed smiled grimly. "Perfect. Let's tear down their castle, brick by brick." Outside, rain began to fall again. Heavy, relentless. But inside that room, the war had a face now. And its clock was ticking. Dane grabbed his phone. "I'll trace the paper. The ink." You don't get it," Kira interrupted. "This isn't about proving he's alive. It's about exposing us." Her phone buzzed again. Another email from an anonymous account. A photo. Reed at his own grave, watching a child kneel beside it. Timestamped. Clear. "Oh my God," she whispered. Dane stared at it, stunned. "Either he faked his death better than anyone I've seen," Dane muttered, "or someone's walking around wearing his face." Kira looked at the card again, her fingers trembling. We have to go. Dane's eyes flared. Why the hell would we walk into his trap? Kira's voice was hollow. Because not showing up means we've already lost. St. Lucia's Cathedral was dressed in black silk and gold light. Chandeliers shimmered above the marble floor as servers in white gloves floated through the crowd. But this was no memorial. This was the Harlow Foundation's annual black tie auction. Dignitaries, CEOs, media, all gathered under one roof. Kira stood near the podium in a black satin dress, her expression unreadable. Dane stayed close, scanning every movement, every flash of a camera. Any sign of him? She whispered. Dane shook his head. If he's here, he's staying out of sight. Then the lights dimmed. A voice echoed through the speakers, not the MCs. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Gasps. Heads turned. Confused murmurs. Tonight, you're not here to bid. You're here to witness. On the massive screen behind the stage, a video file loaded. Footage began to play, Devlin ordering executions. Dane overseeing black market weapon shipments. Kira's voice, again, admitting to her role in laundering Cerberus money. Kira stumbled back, face draining of color. No, she breathed. The audience murmured louder. Phones lifted. Cameras recorded. Devlin appeared on screen last, laughing over Reed's obituary. Then the screen went black. One last message appeared in red. I died once for your sins. Now it's your turn. The crowd exploded. Dane grabbed Kira's arm. We're leaving. Now. But police officers blocked the exit. Ma'am, sir, we need you to come with us. Kira shook her head, panicked. This wasn't supposed to happen. A woman in the crowd whispered to another. Isn't that Reed Mallory's widow? The name rippled like a curse. And somewhere above, in the cathedral's upper balcony, Reed watched it all with a stillness that wasn't vengeance. It was justice. Reed didn't move as chaos swallowed the gala below him. Dane shouted at the officers. Kira broke down in tears. Devlin tried to slip away, only to be blocked by two federal agents emerging from the side corridor. It was all playing out exactly as planned. From his hidden vantage point in the choir loft, Reed held the remote trigger for the video projector. His gloves stayed on. His exit path was clean. Brody was already downstairs, eyes on every escape route. You seeing this? Brody whispered through the earpiece. Every second, Reed replied. Kira was hyperventilating now. Not from guilt, from fear. The kind of fear she used to fake in arguments. The kind she used to twist Reed into apologizing for her mistakes. And now? Now it was real. Tessa's voice came through the comms. Ulrich just walked in. Right into the fire. You want me to drop the last file? Reed looked out across the crowd. The press, the influencers, the donors. He nodded. Do it. Seconds later, the screen lit up again. Senator Ulrich. A speech from 5 years ago. Private. Meant for Cerberus eyes only. We use the fallen. We own their memory. They die heroes. We live kings. Gasps turned to cries. Security flooded the stage. And Reed, ghost among the living, turned his back and walked into the shadows. The trap had been triggered, but the reckoning had only just begun. Kira sat alone in the stark white interrogation room at the Federal Holding Center. No cuffs. No questions yet. Just silence and cold steel. She stared at the mirrored glass across from her. Somewhere behind it, someone was watching. Probably multiple someones. Her lawyer hadn't arrived. Dane hadn't called. And Reed. He was real. Alive. And worse, righteous. The door finally opened. A woman in a dark blazer stepped in, dropped a thick folder on the table. Mrs. Mallory, she said calmly. You've been quite busy these last few years. Kira didn't respond. The agent opened the file, spread photo after photo across the table. Offshore accounts. Wire transfers. Her signature. Her face on charity boards. Her voice. Then the agent added something new, names Kira didn't recognize. These people don't exist, the agent said. But their bank accounts do. Cerberus has been creating ghosts for years, laundering funds through shell charities using fake identities. Yours was the test model. She tapped the final photo. Reed's death certificate. Now tell me something, Kira. Did you forge it, or just sign what they handed you? Kira swallowed hard. I didn't. Did you love him? The question wasn't legal, but it pierced like a blade. Kira blinked fast. I thought he was never coming back. Yet here he is, the agent said. And here you are. Kira looked down at the documents. At the life she helped build, on a grave that wasn't empty. Do you want immunity? The agent asked. Because if you wait for Dane or Devlin to protect you, you'll rot. Kira said nothing. But she connected the drive, tapped in the decrypted key. The screen blinked to life. Inside, complete Cerberus project archives. Not just money, people. Hundreds of deceased military operatives. Photos, mission logs, digital files forging their death. Dozens were still alive. Off-grid. Others weren't so lucky. Reed scrolled until he found Elias Rand, one of the last teammates from his final deployment. Status: executed during asset cleansing. Reed's fingers tensed on the mouse. He was trying to leave, he muttered. Tessa said nothing. She let the silence speak. Farther down the file, a list of Cerberus-owned shell companies, including ones embedded in foreign aid, veteran housing, even child welfare. Brody entered the room, expression grim. That little Braddock kid? They tried to grab him. Reed's head snapped up. What? Two guys posing as social services. Said the aunt had filed a report. Neighbor got suspicious. Cops were called. Is he safe? Brody nodded. I've got him moved. Private security. No one touches him. Reed looked back at the screen. They're cleaning house, he said. Fast. Tessa scrolled to the final folder. Video, Devlin Archive. Inside were hours of private conversations, including recordings from his meetings with politicians, judges, military brass. Unfiltered. Arrogant. Indictable. Reed leaned back. This is it. Tessa whispered. You really gonna drop it all? Reed's voice didn't waver. All of it. Devlin sat at the head of a long glass table in his penthouse, surrounded by lawyers, lobbyists, and former allies. His face, for once, betrayed uncertainty. Damage control, he said sharply. What are our options? One man cleared his throat. If the full archive leaks, it's over. Your foundation, your funding, your name. Devlin cut him off. It won't leak. We're already tracking the source. Another advisor leaned in. It's not just legal anymore. This is war. Whoever's behind this is inside the system. Dane stood near the window, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. We underestimated him, he said. Reed Mallory isn't a ghost. He's a fuse. Devlin's phone buzzed. An anonymous number. He answered. Devlin, Reed said, his voice quiet, calm. We both know how this ends. Devlin exhaled slowly. What do you want? Exposure, Reed replied. Public. Global. Permanent. I can make you disappear again. You tried. Didn't stick. Devlin's tone sharpened. I'll give you something. Immunity for your people. Protection. A seat at the table. I'm not here to sit, Reed said. I'm here to turn the table over. Click. Devlin slammed the phone down. Dane watched him. He's coming. No. Devlin snapped. He's already here. Outside the window, in the tower opposite, a red laser dot blinked briefly on the glass. Then vanished. Ty Braddock sat on a bench beneath the wide oaks of Ironwood Park, a worn basketball grip between his hands. The ball didn't bounce anymore, not since the night two strangers came to take him away. He hadn't spoken to anyone, not even the woman guarding him. Until today. Reed knelt down beside the bench, dressed in jeans, hoodie, cap pulled low. You're safe here, Reed said. Ty glanced up. Who are you? A friend of your dad's. Ty narrowed his eyes. My dad's dead. Reed nodded slowly. I know. Silence hung between them. Then Ty asked, did he fight back? Reed reached into his jacket, pulled out a small USB drive. This has a video of him refusing to give them what they wanted. He died protecting you and your mom. Ty stared at the drive. Why now? He asked. Reed looked out at the trees, his voice steady. Because it's time the world knew who the real heroes were. Ty whispered. They said he deserted. They lied. Reed stood, placing the drive gently on the bench. When this is over, you'll have a name they can't erase again. Ty looked up. Are you going to make them pay? Reed didn't blink. Every last one. Her name was Leona Strickland, and she'd stayed hidden for 4 years. Reed found her in a farmhouse on the Georgia line. No cell signal. No internet. Just peace, and the guilt of knowing her husband's murder had been called classified. She answered the door holding a rifle. But when she saw Reed's face, she lowered it. I thought you were a ghost, she whispered. I was, Reed said. But now I need your voice. She let him in without another word. Inside, the house was quiet. Leona moved like someone used to checking every window twice. Reed laid out the files. Photos. Maps. Leaked videos of Devlin's team signing off on her husband's fake disappearance. Leona didn't flinch. She stared straight through it. I knew they killed him, she said, but I couldn't prove it. Reed looked at her. You can now. She leaned forward. What do you want from me? A testimony. Not in court. Not behind closed doors. I want you to speak to the world. On camera. Leona's eyes welled, not from grief, but from the weight of being believed. If I do this, they'll come for me. They already did, Reed replied. You survived. Now let's make sure no one else has to hide like you. She nodded once. And in that moment, another wall in Cerberus fortress cracked. It happened fast. Reed was in a safe house outside Tallahassee when the power cut. Dark. Silent. A flash grenade shattered the front window. Brody tackled Reed down as 2 masked men stormed the hallway. Gunfire. Screams. Then nothing. When Reed came to, the house was on fire. He crawled through smoke, calling out Brody. No answer. He staggered to the back door, vision swimming. Sirens in the distance. Backup or cleanup? He burst out into the night air, lungs heaving. Someone grabbed him, Tessa, bleeding from a cut above her eye. They took him, she gasped. Brody's gone. Reed's heart dropped. Who? He rasped. Tessa handed him a bloody patch ripped from one of the attackers' gear. Cerberus. The logo burned into the cloth. They're hunting us now, she said. Reed stared into the fire as it consumed everything they'd built. He thought they'd been ahead, but now they were on borrowed time. He clenched the patch in his fist. Then we hit back. Hard. The penthouse in Zurich was wrapped in glass and silence. Inside, Nathan Elrich, banker, fixer, and Cerberus's financial architect, sipped a scotch as he scrolled through the crash reports. 4 accounts frozen, 7 under audit, and a fresh subpoena from the European Financial Tribunal. He didn't panic. Yet, until the secure server blinked. New message from unknown subject, final withdrawal attachment, ghosts_account dump.zip. He opened it, and his blood ran cold. Every dollar moved, every shell company, every identity used to bury Cerberus funding, exposed. He hit the emergency call line. Devlin, Elridge snapped. It's over. He has everything. Across the ocean, in D.C., Devlin's voice came cold. Then you know what to do. The call ended. Elridge opened his gun safe. Except it wasn't there. Instead, a phone. It buzzed. One message from Reed. This time, no easy exits. The screen changed. A live stream. His face. Devlin's. Dane's. Kira's. Broadcasting to an anonymous server in real time. Elridge froze. Outside, sirens howled. This time, no backdoors. No protection. Only truth. In ruin. At 4:17 a.m., hashtag Cerberus files began trending globally. Anonymous forums. Whistleblower sites. Military Reddit threads. Within an hour, news anchors were reading names on live TV. Victims. Fake deaths. Misused funds. And suddenly, Reed Mallory was no longer a ghost. He was a reckoning. Tessa stood in the safe house bunker, eyes on 6 screens as everything unfolded. They're burning, Reed. But he didn't look relieved. He stared at the single photo on the wall, Brody, face half-shadowed, taken months ago. We're not done. Devlin's already boxed in, she said. Interpol issued a red notice. Kira's files got pulled into federal court. Reed stepped away from the screens. Devlin doesn't run. He eliminates. You think he'll go after Brody? Reed's jaw tightened. He already has. He opened the satellite laptop. tracked the Cerberus server's live GPS signal, one node blinking on and off from the Balkans. Private compound. No chatter. That's where they're holding him. Tessa exhaled. You planning on breaking in? No, Reed said. I'm planning on breaking it. Kira sat in the white-walled federal holding room, staring at her reflection in the mirror, pale, hollow, stripped of luxury and lies. She had a choice. Devlin had left her hanging. No lawyer, no deal, just silence. And then a file slid under the door. A flash drive. No note. She plugged it into the interrogation room's laptop. A video loaded. Dane, in a private meeting with Devlin. Voice clear. If Kira breaks, she's done. We let her hang. We'll deny everything. Her breath caught. Reed's voice followed, recorded over audio. Now you know how much you ever meant to them. Tears welled, but she didn't let them fall. The door opened. An agent stepped in. You ready to talk? Kira stood. No, she said. I'm ready to testify. Devlin's office windows overlooked the Capitol, but he wasn't watching the sunrise. He was watching the collapse. His monitors blinked with live feeds of agents raiding Cerberus warehouses, military tribunals requesting his presence, investors pulling out. Then came the final blow. A live feed appeared from a courtroom. Kira, taking the stand, sworn in. The world watched as she looked directly into the camera. My name is Kira Mallory. I was part of the Harlow Foundation. I helped cover up the deaths of U.S. veterans. And I am here to tell you the truth. Devlin's hand slammed against the desk, glass shattering beneath his palm. You stupid girl, Dane burst in. We need to go. Now. Devlin didn't move. She flipped. Dane stared at the screen. His voice shook. We're finished. Devlin looked out the window one last time, like a king watching his city burn. Reed's voice echoed from the screen, layered over the feed. This is your legacy. Dane Holloway was cornered. Not in a courtroom. Not in a press release. But in a private jet hangar outside Dulles, where he thought no one could reach him. 2 SUVs blocked the exit as he tried to board the plane. He spun, pulling a sidearm, only to find Reed standing 30 feet away. No words. No dramatics. Just that quiet stare. You don't want this, Dane warned, gun shaking in his hand. Reed stepped forward. You had Brody taken. Dane's hand tightened. It was Devlin's call. That's the thing about Fall Guys, Reed said. You only realize you're one when no one catches you. Sirens roared in the distance. You're bluffing. I'm not. Dane lunged for the plane, but the SWAT team swarmed in like a black wave. He hit the ground hard, pinned under boots and cold steel. Reed stood over him. You took everything I had. My home. My name. My wife. Dane spat blood. She was never yours. Reed didn't flinch. No. She was yours until she saw the truth. Dane's scream was muffled under the cuffs, and Reed walked away, not as a victim, but as the executioner who never needed a weapon. Inside the Federal Monitoring Center, Tessa watched as Cerberus accounts bled out in real time. Transaction freezes, seized servers, blacklisted shell companies, each one blinking red on her map. Cerberus is officially dead, she said, barely believing it. Reed stood beside her, but his mind wasn't in the room. His eyes were locked on a satellite image. A compound in the Balkans. Coordinates live. A signal pulsing faintly. Brody. They're moving him, Reed said, voice low. Tessa looked over. You're not thinking straight. He's alive. I know it. We don't even know if that's him. Reed turned slowly. I do. She paused, then reached into her bag and handed him a black case. 3 names. Burn phones. Contacts? No backup. Reed opened the case. Inside, a satellite tracker, 2 burner phones, and a photo. Brody. Chained. Eyes bloodied, but alive. We leave in 3 hours, she said. And Reed. He met her eyes. We don't come back empty. The mission wasn't official. It wasn't sanctioned. But it was real. Reed stood in a Czech airstrip at dawn, boots on wet gravel, staring down the hangar lights flickering in the early fog. Tessa checked the comms. We've got 1 shot. Then we make it count. They boarded the small black jet, 1 pilot. one exit strategy. Reed sat down and stared at his reflection in the window. For the first time since this began, he looked different. Older, sharper, clearer. He was no longer the man who got left behind. He was the one people whispered about in boardrooms and nightmares. After this, Tessa asked quietly, "What happens to you?" Reed thought for a long beat, then said, "I take a name no one knows. I disappear for real." She nodded, didn't press. "You earned that." Reed whispered, almost to himself, "No, I built it." The jet engines roared, and Reed left behind the country that tried to bury him, this time on his own terms. The Cerberus compound wasn't just a bunker, it was a fortress. Steel gates, guard towers, watchdogs, thermal scanners. And inside one of those buildings, Brody, bruised, restrained, but alive. Reed watched from a hilltop, sniper scope steady, heart thudding with precision. He counted guards. 4 in the north corridor, 2 by the cells. Tessa tapped his shoulder. "Ready?" Reed nodded once. They moved like ghosts, using blind spots between surveillance rotations. A timed breach, silent entry, takedowns clean, fast, surgical. Inside the cell block, Brody lifted his head at the sound of soft boots. "Reed." "Yeah." Reed breathed. "Got you." Brody smiled, blood on his teeth. "Took your damn time." Reed cut the cuffs, helped him to his feet. "Let's finish it," Brody muttered. Reed looked at him. "No. Let's end it." Ty Braddock stood in front of a camera, stiff in his oversized blazer, the collar brushing his chin. Behind him, the National Veterans Monument gleamed under sunlight, its polished stone lined with names that, until last week, had never been recognized. He adjusted the mic nervously. Reed stood just behind the cameras, silent, hands folded, as never leaving the boy. Ty looked down at his note cards. Then he didn't read them. He spoke from memory. "My name is Ty Braddock. My dad's name was Colton Braddock. He was a soldier. A good one. And he died protecting something no one believed in any more truth." His voice didn't shake. "They said he abandoned us. That he left. But that was a lie. A company called Cerberus used him. Like they used a lot of soldiers. They buried his name so they could get rich." A hush fell over the crowd. Reporters held their cameras still. Veterans lowered their heads. "I'm here so no one forgets what they tried to erase." Behind Ty, a new plaque was unveiled. Colton Braddock. Elias Rand. Reed Mallory, status, survivor. Reed's breath caught. Tessa glanced at him. "You okay?" He didn't answer. Just nodded once. And for the first time in years, he felt real. Federal prosecutor Elena Vargas stood before a packed congressional hearing, gripping the microphone like a weapon. "The Cerberus case is not about one company," she said. "It's about the systems that allowed it to thrive." Behind her, an LED screen rotated through faces, judges, military brass, tech CEOs, all now under indictment. "We've traced funding back 10 years," she continued. "Through fake charities, weaponized nonprofits, and fraudulent death records." One senator cleared his throat. And how many people were knowingly complicit? Vargas's jaw tightened. Too many to count. Then the screens paused. A face appeared. Devlin. And beneath it, another, Senator Ulrich. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Vargas didn't blink. "They used our veterans. Our grief. Our patriotism. And they hid behind legislation that was written to protect heroes, not exploit them." A journalist stood in the gallery, voice rising. "And who stopped it?" Vargas smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "A dead man." Reed stood once more before his own grave. Same plot, same stone. Only this time, it had changed. Beneath his engraved name was a new line, "Survived." And made it matter. He crouched, ran his fingers along the lettering. Birds chirped in the background. Somewhere behind him, a groundskeeper swept gently, letting him have the moment. Tessa approached from a distance, stopped a few feet behind. "You ready?" she asked. Reed stared at the dirt beneath his feet. "They'll ask for more. Then say no." He stood slowly. "I don't think they want me. They want the myth." Tessa tilted her head. "Then let the myth die. But keep the man." Reed didn't smile, but his shoulders eased. He turned one last time to the stone. I buried the wrong thing the first time, he said. Now I'm done. They walked away from the grave together. Not toward war, but maybe, finally, toward peace. It began as a whisper online, then a ripple, then a wave. The ghost file, decrypted and uploaded anonymously, flooded across platforms, a massive public database listing every fake veteran identity used by Cerberus over the last decade. Faces, names, families, money, and stories. Each entry was paired with a brief video or written testimony, submitted by loved ones, survivors, or, in a few rare cases, the soldiers themselves. The world was stunned. News anchors stumbled over the gravity of it. Politicians fumbled to distance themselves. And the public? They reacted with fury, but also with something else, recognition. Digital memorials sprang up within hours. Schools dedicated classrooms. Nonprofits rewrote their missions. A movement was born, not from guilt, but from truth finally told. Reed watched it unfold from a rented farmhouse, his phone vibrating nonstop with updates. Tessa stood nearby, holding a mug of coffee. You started something, she said. I didn't start anything, Reed replied quietly. I just refused to let it stay buried. Ty's video had over 10 million views. Leona's testimony was playing on screens in every VA hospital across the country, and somewhere in that noise, the world remembered the dead. Properly. Finally, the courtroom was packed. Reporters, former donors, quiet protesters in uniform, all watching as Kira Mallory took the stand for the last time. Her lawyer did most of the talking, trying to spin her cooperation into leniency. But the prosecution had the weight of blood and betrayal on their side. When the sentence came down, it was clear and hard. 20 years. Federal. No parole for 10. Kira blinked once. Only once. She didn't cry. Didn't speak. Just stood as the cuffs were placed on her wrists and the gavel echoed like a gunshot. From the gallery, Reed watched her being led away. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. She mouthed something. He didn't ask what. He wouldn't give her that. As she disappeared behind the doors, the judge moved to dismiss. Tessa leaned in. You okay? Reed inhaled deeply. No, pause. But that doesn't matter anymore. They walked out together, cameras flashing. But Reed didn't look back. He had nothing left behind him. Solitary confinement in a maximum security black site didn't offer many comforts. Dane Holloway paced a 6-by-8 concrete room, hand shaking, jaw clenched. No trial. No statement. He'd been declared a national security threat and disappeared into the system he once helped manipulate. No name. No future. Just silence. Until the door opened. A guard entered, silent, dropped a folder, and left. Inside, a photo. Reed, standing beside Brody. Alive. Whole. Dane threw it across the room, cursing into the walls. Then he saw the second photo worse. Kira. In cuffs. Face pale, defeated. And under that? A single typed sentence. This is the legacy you built. Dane sat down on the floor, finally, the fury draining from him like poison from a dying man. And for the first time in his life, he had no one to blame. It was a crisp autumn morning when Ty Braddock stepped onto the steps of Capitol Hill, wearing a simple navy blazer and his father's old dog tags tucked beneath his shirt. He stood before a sea of cameras, surrounded by reporters, veterans, and families who had been waiting years, some decades, for answers. Behind him, banners flapped in the wind. Honor the invisible. The podium mic screeched slightly before settling. Ty looked down at his hands, then out at the crowd. My dad was a hero, he began, voice steady. But you never knew that. Because they took his name and buried it with lies. He glanced at the crowd. But someone brought the truth back. He didn't say Reed's name. He didn't have to. And now, we remember them all. Out loud. With their real names. With pride. Not behind red tape or black files. Applause began small, then spread like wildfire. Reed stood at the edge of the crowd, in the shadows, hands in his pockets. Tessa turned to him. You proud? He nodded once. He found his voice. She smiled. So did you. The farmhouse was quiet that night. Reed stood alone in the study, holding an envelope that had arrived without a return address. Just one word handwritten across the front: closure. Inside, a photo of the men from his unit. Real ones. Ones who didn't come back. Ones Cerberus had erased. And behind the photo, a certificate. Reinstatement. Full military honors. Name cleared. Reed set it down on the desk. He didn't need it, but it meant something, to know the world now told the truth. Brody walked in, holding 2 beers. Guess that's it then? Reed took one. Almost. You ever gonna disappear again? Reed leaned back in the chair. No. I think I'll stay this time. Just quietly. Brody nodded, then smirked. So what now? Reed looked out the window at the dark field beyond the house. Now, he said softly. Now we live. The sky was just starting to turn amber when Reed stood on the porch, watching the sun rise for the first time without a plan, a target, or a name to erase. Just a new day. Ty's bike could be heard in the distance, laughter trailing behind him. Inside, the kettle hissed softly. Tessa joined him, a coffee in each hand. You ever think about who you'd be if none of this happened? She asked. Reed watched the horizon for a long moment. No, he said finally, because this is who I am now. A pause. Then he asked, quietly, if they erased your name, who would remember you? And maybe that's the question for all of us. What would we leave behind if no one ever knew we existed? If you've made it this far, I want to know, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. If this story moved you, if it gave you chills, or made you feel something real, hit that like button so we know to keep telling stories like this. And if you're not subscribed yet, you already know what I'm gonna say. Stick around. More epic revenge. More thrillers that actually hit. And more stories that stay with you long after they're done. Until next time. Take care of yourself. We'll meet again in the next one.